You are listening to Digging In Podcast, presented by Rooted Wealth Advisors.
Welcome back to another new episode of the Digging In Podcast. Look who we brought back in, Zach Gray, founder of Rooted Wealth Advisors. What a special guest you are. How are we doing today?
Special in so many ways, yeah. I'm doing great. Super excited to talk about a book that
Whoa.
you leaned in on.
Yeah, hold on. I want to be the one to announce it. So today, this episode's special because we are talking about Zach's book that recently launched, Harvesting Tomorrow, A Farmer's Guide to a Prosperous Retirement. Zach, tell me more about this book.
Well, that's where we met, man. You're working on a cattle farm, and you know a little bit about my farm background. If you're watching today and you don't know, I grew up on a small family farm, Central Illinois. Grew up showing cattle after I got done showing rabbits.
That shocked me, by the way.
Yeah, those things will scratch you. You know, that was something I really enjoyed. I loved. Helped my grandfather on his row crop farm, anywhere from baling hay, walking beans, helping a little bit at harvest time. And have seen for the last, I guess, few decades that I've been in this industry, farm families having some unique struggles when we think about financial planning, when we think about retirement. And thus, this book, well, it was born for that reason, to lean in to unique circumstances that farm families have. You know, I think that there's a lot of what we do, John, that can kind of cross-pollinate, can correlate, you know, throughout different industries. And I'm not saying that there's not some of that leans into farming, but there's a lot of oddities there, right? You think about, you know, maybe farm assets like farm ground's been passed on for generations, or thinking about where does our cash flow come from? What's it look like when I shut the engines down for the last time? Or especially if I'm only maybe renting, or maybe it's more livestock focused where I'm getting my cash flows. Well, what happens when we're too old to throw the buckets of feed, or we don't have the next generation that wants to step into the farm? We're seeing that it really an all-time high where it's like, hey, the kids have left the farm, so now what? So I thought it was just a really timely point to put together really what has been, once again, years and years of notes to help farm families out there and lean in what ways we can.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's number one, and I'm not just saying this because I'm biased. I think it's a great book, a lot of valuable, not just information, but I think, you know, really just peeling the layers back in terms of some strategies, right? And just really putting the cards out there, which I think is good, right? It's not kind of like this, you know, hey, here's a little bit, you know, but not everything, right? And I really think it just lays it all out there, and is really going to provoke some thought, right, to a lot of farmers, a lot of farm families, and a lot of farm businesses, right? There's so many intricacies in there, and you know, now you know we have a couple decades of experience working with those types of folks, and you know, there are a lot of strategies, a lot of concepts that are out there. But I really want to circle back to kind of, you know, how our relationship started, you know, a couple decades ago, you know, working, you know, on your cattle farm there in Danforth, Illinois. And, you know, man, that was so cool, right? Because I think, you know, if a lot of folks that are probably looking at me today, or, you know, didn't know me 15, 20 years ago, are going to, you know, think, you farming, right? You fitting cattle, right? Washing them, you know, blowing them out. Like, no way, right? Baling hay, no way. Yes way. I'm here to tell you that right now. I got a lot of people that can vouch for it. But no, just, you know, I think, you know, whether it was on my hands and knees, you know, picking weeds around the trees, you know, whether it was, you know, 7 a.m., you know, loading calves in the wash rack, and, you know, blowing out, you know, Curdy in the wash rack, it really taught me a lot about hard work, but it also gave me, you know, a different perspective, right? You know, a couple uncles of mine, you know, more on the grain side of farming. Didn't have a lot of experience on the animal side, besides maybe some, you know, hog showing, and it really just gave me that different perspective. And I think most importantly, it taught me the value of hard work. So I just wanted to kind of share that, correlation that I have to farming, and ultimately just give some of our viewers a little bit of backstory of how we met, because it was long before, Root Wealth Advisors.
I don't know the best way to say this, but I think that if you're a farm family that happens to be watching this, in even if you're not, I think that having an advisor that understands the moving parts of your picture, let's just leave it at that. Let alone if it's maybe a business owner, maybe it's an entrepreneur type situation, maybe it is a farm situation. And once again, this could correlate over to, making sure that you're making the most of a 401k allotment and making sure that you're getting the right cash flows to build alongside a pension if you happen to be maybe union or teacher or something of the sorts. It's just really important that you're working with an advisor that you trust and that gets it. And the reason that I bring that up specifically when we talk about this book or we talk about farm, that's not an exaggeration. John definitely was a young guy decades ago at this point. He didn't have the gray hair that's setting in,
I knew it was
and
coming.
I had more of it. Okay, but I think it's important that people understand that, we do get it. So if you're watching this, you have a farm background, or once again, that translates very well to a business type background. We understand basis. We understand cash flows. We understand what things would look like to pass along. We understand what it looks like to package them up in the right way as we think about legacy. And we try to make sure to make the absolute most of what you've worked so hard for. I wanted to make that note because I think that until you've lived that, you just don't understand it. And I think that, we've said this before, we talked about it in the book. Farming is not just a job. It's not just something where you show up, you punch the 9 to 5. I think you were joking as we were chatting here off camera that, Zach, we like work 7 days a week. Well, they don't feed themselves, man. Like that's just the way that it is. It's a lot like parenting, John. You haven't gotten to. The kids just don't feed themselves. Neither do animals. So I think it's just, it's part of you. And I think that's very true even with those that maybe step into a role. We just talk so much about the emotional component in this book, and I think that that's once again, that's something that everyone watching today can take away. If you happen to be a farm family, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know, the great, 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 great grandfather came over on a boat. He ended up farming and he passed this generationally on down the line. And, maybe that's changed over the years. Maybe it's still in a family trust. I don't know the scenarios. I know that there's a lot of different ways you can play those cards and that they've been played over time. I also know that that drastically affects how things are going to look financially, maybe stepping into retirement or even for generations to come. That's what we cover in this book. I think it's really critically important, but it's also a message that if you're watching and you have absolutely nothing to do with farm, if you happen to be one of our clients in a big city like Chicago or Denver, and you say, I've never stepped foot on a farm, a lot of this still correlates on over. And it doesn't matter if it's some of the tactics and strategies that we talk about. We kind of talk about these 5 seeds in this book. It's a little bit of kind of the 5 different pieces of our roadmap design that we talk a lot about with our clients, making sure that we're thinking through the investment picture. What does income look like? Where are we going to get the money? Taxes, thinking through healthcare costs, thinking through legacy. Like these are 5 critical areas that you need to be speaking of. We speak about them in kind of these seeds, if you will, the kind of this plant analogy in this book. But it's really important that if you're watching today, you take that, you internalize it. And I think also the emotional component is very true. And it doesn't matter if you're just simply, working that 9 to 5 job. That's a big part of your identity, and we get that. I'm thinking of a great client of ours in our Tennessee office was a really highly paid exec, and he stepped into to put basically stock shelves at Home Depot, and I thought, oh my goodness, I really, if they knew your background, and he says, I just, work is a part of me, right? It's this emotional tie, let alone when we're talking about something as important as farming, right? As we think about something that's already been generational, I think that's a really critical component that maybe we don't talk enough about, on this podcast. I know that we talk a lot about it in our meetings, in our visits with clients or prospective clients. And hey, if that lands with you, or this at least, I don't know, kind of gets you thinking, and especially if you're on the ag side of the equation, livestock or grain farming, go to harvestingtomorrow.com. You can go grab a copy there, and we'll have some other cool things we can get in your hands too.
A couple things I want to point out that you talked about. I think number one, I think it's really important because I know a lot of our Denver clients, some of our suburb clients do watch the podcast, and they might be thinking to themselves, well, farming doesn't really apply to me, but there's so much correlation to what we do from a farming aspect, right, from a business aspect to even just as an individual and family aspect. So there's a lot of correlation there that I think is really important. I think the second is let's kind of peel back a layer of this book. I mean, you kind of gave this really high level, but tell us a little bit more about these traps that we talk about, but then, also the seeds that we plant alongside those.
Yeah. So in the book, we talk a lot about and start to peel back just kind of my personal story, as you know. And it's important that I think that we think about what we've deemed as these traps in the book. And it's sometimes not thought about until we're trapped already, after the ink's dried or the check's already put in the bank. And I talk about one of them in particular as I think about taxation. My grandfather, as I've already alluded, one of my biggest role models, still here with us today, and love Gramps dearly, and watched him work and work hard, and then one day had a farm sale. I remember it. I mean, pretty vividly. And they were just kind of like riding up and down in this little auction truck, and they had all the equipment kind of up and down his lane. And I remember it being a really emotional day for him. What I didn't realize at that moment, of course, is, maybe I was probably about a teenager, um, is the financial component, right? I mean, likely, I don't know this to be 100% true because I don't know his tax forms, but he likely depreciated all that equipment, as he should, and he sold it all in one day, in one tax year. That's problematic, right? As we start to think about how much of a haircut went into Uncle Sam's pocket. So we talk a lot about, these different traps. We lead with the tax trap. We even think about what that looks like in terms of kind of this land sale type of trap, or ambush, we call it in the book, because we think to ourselves, hey, this is the biggest nugget of assets that I have. This is the biggest value. And that's true, most likely, for anyone that would be a farm family watching. And once again, this correlates very well to, hey, if you're a business owner. I'm thinking about a dealership that's not too far from the office where we have the studio. We helped with that. Thinking through what it looks like to say, hey, here's the real kind of heavy ticket item. What are we doing to make sure that we don't get ambushed by Uncle Sam when he has his hand out for taxes? We have to then think through, another trap being the income streams. Because once again, I mean, if you throw the feed bucket for the last time, when you load the truck and they go to market, there's no more cash flow coming from those feedlots. Like, it just isn't. I mean, if you're not putting in the work there, it ain't giving you the cash
It's
flow.
over.
It's over. Same though in terms of, like, we think about, hey, what's total cash flow, and then what's it look like if maybe we only own 80 acres or a couple hundred acres. I'm not saying that that's not a great value. Let's back up. There's some other traps there that could be a problem. But what's that look like when it comes to income, right? Because, hey, we need cash flow. Without it, retirement just, yeah, it ain't great, So we have to be thinking about a lot of these different components, these traps, if you will, that we speak to in the book. But as you just mentioned, if you're a business owner watching, a lot of this is a direct correlation. And if you're maybe someone that says, hey, I have nothing to do with running my own business, never was an entrepreneur, never ran a farm. Well, hey, what's it look like for those dollars you've stacked away in the 401k? That's taxable. And frankly, that's not even going to be at long-term capital gains rate. That's going to be at ordinary income rate. So what are you doing to make sure to sidestep that trap? What are you going to do to get the cash flows? Yeah, sure. Maybe you're going to get Social Security. Maybe you're fortunate enough to have a pension. Uh, is that enough? Do you have to supplement that income? That's a trap that we have to be thinking long and hard about. So once again, we got to build around kind of these 5 core areas, if you will. Yes, we speak to them in certain analogies in this book to kind of tie it to the farming aspect, but there is so much that, once again, just it correlates to anyone's situation. You got to make sure you're putting a good plan together.
100%. And let me just remind you, if you're watching or listening, go to harvestingtomorrow.com, get a free copy of your book along with some other goodies alongside of that are really valuable to you. So, Zach, with regards to the book, maybe something else, is there anything else you want to share?
The thing that I think is probably the biggest topic, and I think it's actually the biggest trap, and it's the most complex piece of this book, does tie back to emotion, which we've already babbled a little bit about, but it's the legacy side of the equation. And we've already touched on taxes quite a bit. As you know, maybe some of those watching don't know, we've recently launched Rooted Tax. We have this tax advisory wing that we're bolting on to Rooted Wealth Advisors. And I think that's critically important. For years, we've leaned into some good CPA relationships that we've had. Um, Frankly, there's some of those relationships that are getting to capacity. And we've said, hey, if we can't continue to lean in there and we can't find the next one to lean into, I guess let's go build it ourselves. So, little bit of a side note with that, but I think it's good information for everyone watching. And then the legacy side of the equation, as we jokingly say, yet frankly, in a very serious way, it's true. When it's too late, it's too late. And I think a lot about this in terms of, Jen and I recently went through our own plan, thinking through what's this look like for the companies? What's this look like for the kids? How do we take care of our great team? How do we make sure to take care of all of our clients? And to give you peace of mind, we've given that a lot of thought, especially if you're a client watching. That's definitely been something that we have a strong plan in place that, hey, God forbid something were to happen, and that's not part of the plan. But I think that it's really important for farm families to be thinking about that. But I tell you right now that you don't have to be a farm family to be sitting around one of our conference room tables and to have kids that won't speak to each other, to have things be very vague. I just visited with someone the other day, about $6 million in investments. She says, just leave it to my estate. We'll just let them, fight it out. And I thought, that's a horrible plan. Like, it's just, you don't want that. I know that it's tough to talk about. It's tough to think about. And frankly, sometimes I think people, John, they get that impression about planning, period. Maybe that's a good, I guess, period you can put at the end of this paragraph, because it doesn't have to be that way. I think that that's one of the, that's probably one of the neatest things about our profession is the trust that we have with our clients. I think it's extremely noble to help people, as we say, to and through retirement. And yes, there are some tough conversations. Yes, there are some tough thoughts. I mean, it's not fun to sit down with my wife Jenna and say, what happens if we're not here? Like, what happens if the good Lord calls us home? How do we want to make sure that we're good stewards for our kids, for the team, for the clients, for potentially generations to come that maybe we would never meet in that wild scenario? That's not fun, but I do believe that it's critically important for people to think about. And it doesn't have to be daunting, because that's what you lead the advisor team through, week to week.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it any better. I think, in essence, the conversations are never comfortable when it comes to this kind of succession planning concept, especially when you're dealing with a farm family, a business, and, even more so if you have kind of, hey, this kid wants to do it, this kid wants nothing to do with it. And then it gets even worse if we just kind of close ourselves off. And I think what we do at Rooted Wealth Advisors, the entire advisory team does a really good job of is just kind of helping enable, help encourage, help lead those conversations. Because I would say, and I'm just kind of pulling this out, half the time someone just doesn't want to talk about it. Says they don't care when in reality they really do care. It just makes them feel uncomfortable. They just don't want to talk about it. And I think in reality, if legacy is just a little bit important to you, I mean, even just the tiniest bit, it's so worth having the conversations, because really all the work in terms of, logistics and everything, we take care of that, right? Alongside, whether it's, some of our CPAs or tax law attorneys or estate. I mean, we have this robust team, as you kind of alluded to, that we've built out and are continuing to build out to really step folks through that and make it as simple and painless as possible. So I think just circling back to the book itself, those traps especially are going to help provoke a lot of thought. And I think to me, reading through it, it provokes the thought behind this question, like, am I really thinking about everything that I should be thinking about? And then you get through the seeds of retirement or of just, planning for it. Then it provokes this question of like, okay, am I really thinking about it? But am I also really doing everything that I can and should be doing to maximize, what either I've worked so hard for, my family generations have worked incredibly hard for, and I just once again, you just really should go to harvestingtomorrow.com. It's a free copy, a little bit of extras that'll help bring a bit more value than the book could itself. But Zach, I really appreciate having you on. Love the book. I think it's going to help a lot of families.
Appreciate you, man.
This was Digging In Podcast, presented by Rooted Wealth Advisors.